Ready. I had the remote last, so where did I put it? Okay, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here with you tonight. Share a little bit about our adventure we had this summer and some things that we are involved in. I wanted you to know about that. Is this, Jason, should I have this or does it matter on the lapel mic? Should I have the lapel mic? You can. Okay. Well, I might walk a little bit, so I guess I'll turn it on. Sorry, I should have been ready. Ambassadors of the Prince of Peace, from 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. I was thinking as we were singing these songs together tonight, in Europe, in a lot of ways, it's not like where we live right here, in a whole lot of ways. But one of the ways we don't often think about, there's just not that many believers of anything walking the streets in Europe. There's just not very many. I remember when a good friend of mine moved to Texas that I was in grad school with, and he moved from Pennsylvania. His home was Pennsylvania. I was in graduate school with him for a while at Arizona State. He moved to Amarillo to be director of choirs at Amarillo College. He said, Philip, I've never seen so many churches in one place. It's Amarillo. It's like Lubbock, you know. And we don't think about that. He said there's a Baptist church, there's a Methodist church, and they're huge, and they're full of people, and there's a Catholic church, and there's the Protestant, Anglican church, or whichever, and they're full of people. He said, I'm just not used to that. That's a big difference. There are big churches in Europe, but they're cathedrals that were not a church where we're talking about people, we're talking about the building. And if you go in for a service, they're not usually that full of people worshiping. That's not usually the case. And it seems that in our country, more and more of that mentality of this secular humanistic philosophy is taking over. This idea that God is who you want him to be, or he doesn't exist at all. Your truth, my truth, this idea of relativism, and there's not much to believe in. As a result, there's a lot of people walking around without much hope in anything. That's kind of more of the situation in Europe, just to set a backdrop. I was blessed to be able to go visit. Now, I mentioned, I had pictures of everyone here. The Heinemans here who were just with us. It was so good to hear Rob's report about what they're doing on the other side of Slovakia, on Košice, Slovakia, real close to Ukraine. Of course, Tim Brumfield has been here a few times and talked about his many trips to Mozambique, and we're blessed to partner with him. This summer, I got to be with Bert and Doreen Ritchie in Northern Ireland, and then also got to be in Slovakia with Roman and Johanna a little bit later in the summer. So I want to talk a little bit about that. This is our group in Ireland. We took a day or two to see what was around Dublin, and we got out of Dublin to see Glendalough. There's some ancient ruins there in Glendalough that I think date to the 8th or 9th century monastery where monks actually lived. A very, very beautiful place, scenic place there. This was the choir group that went to Northern Ireland to be with Bert and Doreen. And there's a map. It's kind of small there, but you can make out Coleraine there on the northern part of Northern Ireland. These were our host families. We stayed with host families, and what a blessing that was. Most of them were members of the Church of Christ there in Coleraine, but not all. And so I'll talk about that in a minute, but most of them were. I got to stay with two different ones, Jeffrey McCauley in the upper left. What a dear brother he is, a member of the church there. When he spoke, I had to get him to repeat himself 3, 4, 5 times. I couldn't understand him. That Northern Irish dialect was so strong, and the inflections are different. I'm sorry, Jeffrey, could you say that one more time, please? I'm slow. And so he would slow it down where I could hear what he was saying. Bert and Doreen are up there. They kept a big number. And then I also got to stay with a dear friend, Marianne Long, and I'll talk about her at the end. Working with Bert Ritchie, he has such contacts all over Coleraine. He is well known in Coleraine. He's been a part of that church since he was a little bitty guy. And except for brief times in the States, I don't think he's ever left in a permanent way. He immediately began to put things together with the local government system, working with the mayor of Glens and Causeway Coast, Stephen Callahan, where he hosted us right there and had us come in, and he talked to us about the way their government is set up, and we sang for him. I was able to make contact through LCU's President McDowell, Scott McDowell, through Lubbock Mayor's office, Trey Payne. He was in the final weeks of his office, of his term as mayor, and his crew got together some gifts for me to present the mayor, Stephen Callahan, and we exchanged gifts, and I did on behalf of Lubbock Mayor, and that was a good thing for us to be representatives of Lubbock in that way, but also we sang our spiritual songs. He heard a message of Christ right there with everyone else. So he had many of those contacts there. And that medallion he's wearing is probably centuries old, and precious, precious jewels. He let each one of the students wear that and get a picture. So they got to be mayor of Glens for like 30 seconds while they got a picture. And then they passed it on. So I wasn't important enough to get that. He didn't offer that to me. We did a number of service things that you would think a choir might be able to do. We went to Senior Living Center. There's Anna Love, who's part of our church, right there in the middle there, ministering to the people who were listening to us. A candid shot of Bert Ritchie there in the left corner as he's just smiling and listening and talking to the residents, ministering to them. We also went to Bow Hill Care Home. This is a care home for those who are disabled, mentally disabled. And we stood outside and sang a bunch of VBS songs with them, and they had a ball with that. The residents had a good time. They were up there doing all the motions with us. And so Gary Flanagan would have fit right in there on Booster, Booster, Be a Booster. But we were there for a good while, and a number of things happened. Before I get to the next section, I wanted to talk a little bit about the recent history in Northern Ireland. It's not that recent because it started in the 16th century with Queen Elizabeth. They call it the plantation. We say plantation here, we don't think of this. In the plantation, they actually transplanted English families from the London area who were very loyal to the crown into Ireland to live there and be loyal, and they were given special rights. Well, Ireland remained, if you know a little bit about world history, remained to be a Catholic country. And today they are still, you ask an Irish person, oh, I'm Catholic. They may never go, but they're Catholic. That's their heritage. That's their nationalistic heritage of how they respond to that answer. But I'm not sure there's much conviction behind it as far as any kind of devotion other than to know that that's where they come from. Well, in the 60s, things got so bad as far as the Irish only having 2/3 vote or whatever. Their vote didn't count fully against the rest of the votes anytime they had an election. And things got really bad to the point that over a period of about 20 years, over 3,500 people were killed. And we're not talking, it wasn't really military action, it was paramilitary groups. It was Catholic families attacking Protestant families, and back and forth. Women, children were involved with this. Many children were killed. Just random, we would think just random acts of terrorism in the street. And that was happening. And it was, in many regards, based in this pseudo-religious conviction, Protestant versus Catholic. The Church of England, Church of Ireland, the national identity of the English versus the national identity of the Irish. And it really came to a peak head in Northern Ireland. We toured Londonderry, or the locals, the Irish say Derry, those loyal to the crown say Londonderry, but there are still things there. You can still see remnants of the horrible things that were happening at that time. A lot of the murals, even the artistic murals that are up on the sides of buildings, would show some of the devastation there. I had to be careful. I just Googled to find some pictures. I had to be careful there because some of it was too graphic to even look at. So about the time that ended, Bert Ritchie became involved with bringing peace. Part of that peace accord that he was involved in involved the St. Patrick's Church, Church of Ireland. This is their Episcopal church there, the Church of Ireland. And he had us, and so we came in and we sang songs for them. And there weren't that many people there. I believe the mayor was there. But there weren't that many people there. We did our full program. And they just couldn't talk to us long enough. They provided even lunch. Tea was the official name for this meal. They provided tea for us as long as tea had a bunch of sandwiches and cakes as well and good drinks. I'm good to have tea all the time. But that was phenomenal. Then following that, we got to sing as part of the celebration of the 25th anniversary of Colerane's Churches Forum. This began at the end of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Bert was very much involved with this, where not only Catholics and Protestants came together whose family members had been killed by the other side. You got to remember that. It's hard to identify, hard to even imagine that. If people were coming together who were very close to people that they had lost from this horrible, horrible, violent past, and they came together. But not only them. It wasn't just St. Patrick's Church and the Catholic Church that came together. The Church of Christ was right there in the middle, bringing peace. As was the Baptists and the Seventh-day Adventists, anyone that would agree that Jesus is Lord, if they could agree with that statement, that Jesus is Lord, no matter what stripe of Christianity you might hold to, they were invited to come, and many of them did. Over a dozen different groups came together. And so they still meet together monthly. We sang a program after a banquet for that. There were some of the things that were on display there, talking about their monthly meetings. I was so moved by Bert's speech when he made the speech to the group, knowing who all they were, all the different people that were there. And there were other speakers as well. I wanted to read a few of his words, and he shared it with me after he made the speech. I said, Bert, could you send me that? Please send me that speech. I want that speech. And so I can't get it. Maybe I could get Jared up here to read it in his Irish accent. He did it pretty well. But he said these words: "It was more than essential. It was binding upon we who professed a gospel of peace and reconciliation." Isn't that us? Don't we profess a gospel of peace and reconciliation? That's how he identified himself and all the group there. He said it was binding on us to commit to a process in which we dared venture outside our village theology. That's quite a dare. He said doing so was an admission that a legacy which had been passed through generations on this island was not achieving the prayer for unity in which our Lord prayed, that they might be one, even as I am in you. The journey to which we were called has been well rehearsed over the last 25 years. He said, we were among many who began a journey which has brought us to where we are this evening, a celebration of love, joy, and peace. He continued, like a number here this evening, I had the honor of attending the first meeting in the Lodge Hotel hosted by Coleraine Council's Good Relations, which invited and they challenged our churches to consider a way forward out of our historic divisions to enable the peace process to which the province consented a reality. Following that meeting, a remnant began to congregate on a monthly basis, and he's still very much a part of this. Monthly, meeting with them. Something about that, and he writes these words, but I remember him saying them a little bit differently than this. He said, it reminded me of a first date, first romantic date, in that we were too scared to get too close to each other. Afraid of what they were thinking and what we were thinking. Isn't that kind of the thoughts on our first date? I thought that was very humorous. However, as the months went by, he said the trust began to build, and we were able to share our individual faith journey, and a safe space was created in which we experienced what has been called uncharted waters, the meeting of two humanities. He continued on, but what a blessing that was to be there and see these various groups of people. We have our convictions that are different, for sure. For sure there are differences, but you know where the end of that road, where people are debating, and they're fighting and bickering, no, it's this way. Well, Ireland saw where that leads, where there were eventually bombs and bullets instead of just words. They said, let's bring peace. I think Jesus had a promise for those who would bring peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, he said, for they shall be called sons of God. It was a blessing to be a part of that. This was our final concert. The total number, this is the front half of the church there. In the back half, it was even more full than that, as I recall. This was at St. Malachi's Catholic Church, where a number of those who were at the previous concert, members of the St. Patrick's Church in Coleraine, came. And they came to hear a message about Jesus, that Jesus is Lord, a message of hope, a message of joy and of peace. There wasn't a dry eye when we sang "The Lord bless you and keep you," and we circled around them. Such a blessing that was. One of the families that kept some of the students on this trip, in fact, I think Logan Parks got to stay with them. Logan was part of that, was a member of this Catholic church, and they were very involved, very hospitable. Can't say for sure that they didn't offer Logan a beer. That's just the culture. I think I might have warned them about that. I'm not sure. I was hoping Logan wouldn't need that warning. But it was a blessing to be there and see Bert and Doreen be ambassadors for the Prince of Peace. Then in July, Tammy and I got to take a trip to Slovakia. We first made our way. We wanted to do a little bit of our own time, so we were going to have 3 days in Prague. It ended up being 2 because of delayed flights, and so we went to Prague and saw a little bit there. Took a train down to Bratislava and were immediately greeted by Roman and Johanna and Timko and Lydia, and they showed us the sights, a little bit of Bratislava. We really had a good time of reuniting. Thanks to Dad, who had some euros left and nothing to do with them yet, because he wasn't planning on making any more trips to Europe, but he had these euros. He said, I want you to take them out to dinner, and gave me some euros to do that. So I said, great. We're going to dinner. And so we picked a nice place, and really some beautiful nature hikes all around where they live, and just had a great time visiting, getting caught up. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the recent history of Slovakia, and most of you here remember when the wall was up. Remember the Soviet times and the Soviet regime. I'm old enough to remember having nuclear bomb drills at school, and if the dreaded nuclear bomb hits, it's okay. You just crawl under your desk and get in a crouch position. That desk will save you. I'm not sure how that was going to work, but we trusted them. When we got out, how many of you did that? Did you get crawling? Yeah, you crawled. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Well, Roman grew up under communism in Slovakia. Bratislava was under Soviet rule. Austria was not. In that lower left picture, we are standing in Slovakia. On the other side is Austria. Across the Danube, right there. Johanna was, I'm not sure where Roman was holding the camera. Obviously, he took the picture. But she was telling us that Roman remembers making arrangements with some of his family members who lived in Austria. Somehow they got out before the Soviets came to full power. He had an aunt and an uncle, and they made arrangements that once a month they would come to this spot, the Austrian side of his family on the other side, and they would wave to each other. That's all they could do for years. And you think, this is going to be our lives. That memorial on the right side, that was part of the fencing. You see actually that was a memorial for the thousands of people that were killed trying to get out, trying to swim across, and there were armed guards that would shoot them down as they were trying to get out. So Johanna was relating this information to us with tears in her eyes, telling us how that was Roman's childhood. That's what he lived through. We had a beautiful day of worship with the church there in Bratislava. I asked Roman before we went, how many do you expect? He said, well, there's a number of families I know that are usually here that are gone, and so we might have 15 or 20. I'm thinking 15 or 20. There were 36 there, and 8 more that zoomed in, that were there on virtually. And so the whole service was done in Slovak. The closest I'll ever get to hearing speaking in tongues was that, hearing it in Slovak. But I had a translator. Google Translate I'm sure it wasn't, like having the gift of translation, being able to gift of interpretation. But it was amazing. Through this Google Translate, Roman's preaching, and I get an immediate English version of it there. If you read it closely, the syntax isn't quite right, so it wasn't a perfect translation, but it wasn't bad. Roman did a great job sharing. Let me back it up. On the right here is a young man named Robert and his wife Janka. He's American, she's Slovak. It's interesting that it's the opposite of Roman, who's Slovak, and Johanna's American. But Robert does an awful lot. He works in Austria, but it's just, the border is right there. I mean, you could walk to the border from where Roman and Johanna are, and he's done that several times. But so Robert and Janka are very involved. They have children. There were a lot of kids in the worship time, the worship assembly. And then Roman's message was so appropriate for the day. It was just simply, God wants to be your friend. Jesus wants to be your friend. Today, in English, we might title it, Jesus, the Friend of Sinners. Jesus wants to be your friend. Nothing terribly profound to the mature Christians who've been a Christian a very long time, but simply we can still be inspired by that. I am. But I thought how appropriate for a bunch of people that you never know who's going to be there. The only way they knew to come was by word of mouth. There might be an internet presence. I didn't think to ask him. I don't know if they have a website presence, but it didn't matter because the people who were there came because they were invited by someone who wanted to go, someone who knew about them. Now back up. Notice what you're thinking. What? Wait. There's a guitar right there. What kind of building is it? Well, let me tell you. Like I've been to a church in Dublin before. The Randelagh Church of Christ in Dublin. They do the same thing. They rent a church building by the Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists worship on Saturday. They don't use it on Sunday, so they're glad to rent it out. Church of Christ meets here on Sunday. Yeah, so no worries. That guitar stayed right where it was. No one touched it. No one touched it. But you might have been wondering. So they rent the Seventh-day Adventist church building, and it works beautifully. There's classroom space for the kids. There was a fellowship hall. There was a place to have a meal, and that's exactly what we did afterwards. There was a meal. There was a courtyard in the back, a protected area where that was fenced in, a building on the other side where the kids could go play soccer afterwards. I got to tell you, this worship time, the official start time I think was 10 a.m. I think it probably finally started around 10:30. At about 3, we were leaving. An hour of that was spent in collective worship. An hour of singing and praying and sermon and communion together. But the rest of the time was spent learning and talking to each other. There were many English speakers there. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't have to use Google Translate, really. They all came, and I would talk to them, they'd talk to me, and even there were some Ukrainians there. There was this guy, Max, from Poltava, Ukraine. We immediately hit it off. He spoke English really well. That really helped us hit it off. But I had taken the choir about 10 years ago to Poltava. And so I knew that area and that region, and so we had this to talk about. He was now working in Slovakia. He simply came because his mother-in-law had been taking Slovak classes offered by Roman and Johanna, teaching the Ukrainians how to speak Slovak. Mother-in-law didn't speak English. She spoke some Slovak and Ukrainian, so we didn't have all the languages covered to communicate, but Max and I could talk very much. I talked to Roman today right after our morning assembly, and I asked him if Max has come back, and he said, he hasn't. He's had things come up, but I'm in touch with him, and I'm talking with him. He is open, and he's very interested. We got word, Johanna received word from his mother-in-law after that Sunday together that was the closest community, the closest fellowship he'd ever experienced. Even among the Ukrainians he had met with in Slovakia, he hadn't experienced anything like that before. And he and his whole family were part of it. And they came, they were there early, and they left with us. They were the last ones to leave. There was another family, there were other families just like that. And people that zoomed in, those that zoomed into the service, Roman engaged, and it wasn't like they were just watching and that was it, but he actually greeted them, and they said hello, and they shared prayer requests with each other online. They were living, I think some were even in Ireland, were living there, some were living in other places, and they were able to correspond, and so the community even reached beyond getting through that. Shortly after our time in Bratislava on the Monday morning, we went and rented a van, and we headed out. I was grateful that Roman was there to help us with the negotiations. They didn't pay for any of that, but so that we could get a good van and let him drive. I wasn't sure, that I needed certain stickers to get across borders, but he knew exactly what we needed. And so we made our way to Schladming, Austria, about 4 hours away to the west. Saw some great mountains. By the way, on the left next to Tammy is Timko. He's kind of shy, a little camera shy there, so it's hard to get him. Went to a place called Schladming in Austria. That's a great winter resort for snow skiing, but in the summer they had all kinds of play activities for children, developmental activities on the ski slopes, lots of hiking, lots of things to do there. Our purpose there was just to build them up. It was just to build them up and encourage them and make them feel desired. By the way, when we had our meal together, well, I won't go all the way that far back, but one thing Johanna wanted to be sure to relay to you all, and Roman as well, I was able to give them the prayer book that, remember, we had the Children's Dedication Sunday, and we included the Holomacheks for Lydia, and I gave them the prayer book. She read through all the prayers, and with tears in her eyes again, thanked me for that book. And thanks all of you. She said, we've never felt more connected with the church, with any of our supporters like we were. She said, we feel like we're part of you. I said, well, you are part of us. So that was a tremendous blessing to be able to present that to them and be a part of that. Oh, I could show you all kinds of pictures of Austria. You'll just have to find me on Facebook and look at those pictures. But about some needs in Coleraine. I wanted to mention this, and then I'll talk about needs in Slovakia. This sister that's next to me, Mariana Long, I stayed with her for most of the time. She is a dear friend that I've known pretty much all of my life. She and her husband, Roy, were missionaries in Vienna with my parents. In fact, she was in my parents' wedding. So she's known, I think she grew up with Mom. She was close to the Tulia area growing up. And so been dear friends of the family. And I stayed with her. After their time in Vienna in the 60s, they moved to Coleraine. She and her husband did and helped establish that church in Coleraine Church of Christ. She's really the reason why we support Bert and Doreen Ritchie today. The last time we went in 2019, she told me he is really hurting for support. And he needs to have a little more work funds, a little more funding. And so I pitched that to our missions committee and to our elders, and it was all approved. And so we now do support Bert and Doreen Ritchie, and that's a blessing. Their need is, they're not that young anymore, and they need someone to pass the reins to that will take up the ministry and be strong with it. In 2019, I took the choir there, and they had their eyes set on my son Landon. Landon preached on Sunday morning, and there was a big group of Christians there praying for Landon, that he would come and live in Coleraine and be their preacher. And I think Tammy was probably praying for that too. Things didn't work out that way for Landon, and I'm sure he's following the Lord's will in his area. I know that's the case. But we need to be praying for that, for a young person or couple to go and be, for God to fulfill that niche. Bert has a powerful ministry. He's even met with not just the mayor of Coleraine. He met with royalty, with the royal family. He's met with Queen Elizabeth before she passed, of course, several years ago. He's so unassuming, so humble, yet called on in the community in a variety of ways. During COVID pandemic, he was the main one called on to preach the funerals, and he did that for them. That's a need that we need to be praying for, that God will raise up another servant that could be maybe his apprentice, maybe a Mark type. That could be that apprentice. I think of Mariana oftentimes as a present-day Priscilla. Remember the story about Priscilla and Aquila? She is such a blessing to that church. She spends 2 months out of the year going to Coleraine and just encouraging, having some ladies' classes and encouraging the church there. Big encouragement. But be praying for them in that. Needs in Bratislava. We spent an afternoon and part of an evening in Roman and Johanna's apartment. I'm sure it's less than 1,000 square feet. Tiny apartment. Timko has a room. They have a study that Roman has a room, and it's also a combined playroom and his study. They have their room, and there's one bathroom and a kitchen and an eating area. So these rooms, some of you probably have walk-in closets bigger than these rooms are. If you might imagine that. Now, compound that with a 4-year-old boy, and now their daughter Lydia is crawling everywhere. It's challenging. They're great parents. They're so patient and loving, and they live on the 4th floor. And so anytime Timko, which is pretty much all the time when the sun's up, he's restless and wants to go out. One of them gets out, and they take him down, and they watch him. And there's an asphalt soccer court. It's not a field if it's asphalt, is it? It's all asphalt, a place where he can play soccer and just kick the ball and have fun. And we did that some. It's got like a 4-foot or 3-foot fence, so just high enough that if you kick it over, it's really a pain to go out and get that ball back. But they live in a densely populated area with all the apartments there. And he said, Philip, we were talking to him, it would be so nice to have a house with a yard that Timko could go play in, that's fenced in, that he could do, that they could host people in. Before the kids, they would host a couple or two in their little apartment. They hosted us for a meal together. It's challenging. That's their needs. They are both so uneasy about asking for more support, and they're not living on much support at all. In fact, he told me that Johanna, she was a physical therapist in Albuquerque before they married. Grew up in New Mexico and had a physical therapy practice there. Said that she made more than twice what they make now, just all alone on her salary, which she doesn't make any at all. She's told us, she could go to work there, but for what it would cost for the child care for the kids, they wouldn't be coming out ahead. And so might as well not work and take care of the kids if that's what it's going to cost. but they're in need of a house. They've started just a little bit expressing the need to people, and they have a little bit of money saved up. Things are so expensive there. That's one reason that they're so timid about asking. They believe they could find a way to finance it with the help of securing a big enough down payment on just a modest home, and that would be $75,000 is what they're trying to raise, is $75,000, which in one sense sounds like a lot of money for me. Personally, we were thinking about building a $4.5 million building. $75,000 doesn't sound like a whole lot of money. And I encouraged him. I said, look, let me help you put some things together, and we can see about, that would make a huge difference in their ministry, be able to host some families at their house, and not a huge room, just a modest-sized room that they could have to host families in, that they could study together. Their apartment, it just isn't suitable to doing that right now, especially with the kids. It's just very, very challenging. Something that would have a yard that they could let their kids play and be involved in. And so he feels like, a few months, who knows what's going to happen, but maybe interest rates will fall and things will be more conducive. He's got lines of communication open, but they're looking for that. Again, they feel very timid and very, very uneasy about even asking. I said, Roman, you're doing a great work. You're the Lord's ambassador of peace. I was thinking about their worship time together that began at 10 and ended at 3. I don't take anything away from, in a huge sense, what they were doing all day long on that Sunday was worship. No, for an hour of it, they were actually in the building. They were singing songs. They were having prayers, having communion and a sermon, what we might call the 1 hour of worship, but there was community there. Through the Spirit, Roman and Johanna were deeply involved in establishing this community with Jesus at the center. I got to thinking about Acts 27, when Paul was in the shipwreck. He was on the ship before it was wrecked. You remember this? The people hadn't eaten for some time, and he said, I've been made aware, the Lord has revealed to me that we're all going to be safe. He said, you haven't eaten in so long, take some bread. And to imagine this in the storm, there's a lot of people on the ship, and it gives the exact number, 273 or something. That number comes to mind. I don't remember what the number was. We'll have to look it up. End of Acts chapter 27. You can read the chapter. It's a great read. Read it. But he's establishing community there with Jesus at the center. He takes the bread and he gives thanks, and he breaks it and distributes it. What does that sound like? Sound an awful lot like Jesus in the upper room with his disciples, doesn't it? He took the bread, he gave thanks, and he distributed the loaves. That's what Paul did. So many times we get glimpses of that in Scripture where they're taking bread. Here, they did that with their meal, with their community, with their actual communion service, creating community for people whose lives in so many ways have been shipwrecked. Ukrainian refugees coming in, and others, not just Ukrainians, coming in looking for hope, looking for a friend, and they're finding it. And they're a ray of hope there in Bratislava. To me, $75,000 isn't that high to help establish a ministry that could continue long-term. And that's what I wanted him to think about, was long-term. What can you do long-term? Well, it's really high. It is, but not unattainable. So I'm praying that we can somehow be involved in that, maybe through Harvest Sunday. We haven't discussed it at all. Some way that we can participate in helping them raise some funds to just see about getting a down payment to make this a reality for them. The Lord is doing amazing things, though, in Slovakia. He can and will continue to do amazing things, and in Northern Ireland and in other places throughout the world, because there's community in the church. Jesus is in the center of it, and the people are truly showing His glory. They're ambassadors of Christ. They're ambassadors of peace. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. God is making His appeal through us. And again, Matthew 5, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. That's my report, and that's our message tonight. I hope that you're experiencing the peace of God. Paul described it as a peace that passes all understanding. He described that peace as a guardian of our hearts. When he said, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God will guard your heart. It will stand as a sentry to your heart. So if you need to experience that peace, we hope that you'll make that known tonight, and we'd love to assist you in any way. So please come as we stand and sing.